We have a problem in America. We have a president who doesn't care about saving the lives of the American people. We have a government administration that doesn't care about the average working man, that doesn't care about public health. We have an administration that refuses to admit that there is a huge problem with systemic racism in American society today, and that starts with the president himself. We have a president who cannot even simply say the words Black Lives Matter. He won't even say the words. Simply talking about racism, why is it that no one has noticed that Trump's language is geared towards the black slavery mentality? He keeps saying that we need to dominate the streets and the peaceful protesters, whom he thinks are thugs, anarchists, and agitators, and whom he's assumed are mostly black. But what he's really saying is we need to dominate these black people. What he's really saying is these black people are getting a little too rowdy and starting to think that they have some rights in this country, and we need to shut that down. This is the same man who told 4 women of color in the United States Congress that they needed to go back to their own country, despite 3 of them being American born. Go back to your own country is a phrase that has been synonymous with racism, so much so that the federal government allows you to lawfully sue, and they also encourage you to lawfully sue your employer if your employer uses that language towards you and you are a person of color. It's been deemed a racist statement by the federal government. The reason the federal government deems the phrase "go back to your own country" as racist is because it was said to people of color for decades by racists and members of the KKK. It's said to people as if to say, you have darker skin, so you must not be a natural born American. Or that having darker skin means that you don't get to have the same rights afforded to true, meaning white, Americans. He said that his now infamous quote, "When the looting starts, the shooting starts," came from the 1968 police commissioner in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. However, that same police commissioner in 1968 Philadelphia had a very long and very public history of using the N-word, of using racial and gay slurs, and he was deemed as a more fervent participant in far harsher and more severe acts of police brutality solely in the black community than the 1968 Miami police chief that Trump was originally described as quoting. He referred to the Confederacy as a part of our American heritage, completely disavowing the fact that the Confederacy was a group that wanted to enslave and keep enslaved black people, so it's really not a part of all Americans' heritage. And B, that the Confederacy was traitorous to the American ideals and to America as a whole. He refuses to admit that there is systematic racism in our country, even though he claims to be the populist president. Clearly, the populace is saying there is systemic racism in our country and that needs to change. Yet the U.S. president still refuses to admit that fact or let anyone else in his administration admit it. Most of the things that he's done have happened in the past few weeks, with the exception of the 4 congresswomen. So I think it's only a matter of time before we hear huge derogatory racial slurs coming from our president. He has repeatedly referred to the coronavirus as the China virus, the Kung flu. Proudly, he called it the Kung flu. Despite being told on more than one occasion, several times, and being made aware several times that because of that language, racist Americans were attacking Asian Americans. He repeatedly refers to it as the China virus or the Kung flu. Even though he's been told more than once on numerous occasions that Asian Americans are being attacked, physically, violently attacked by racist Americans because he keeps referring to it as the China virus and blaming China for it. Yet he's continued to do so. Now, the virus may have originated in China, but the minute it landed on U.S. soil, it stopped being China's problem. And our president should have taken as many actions as possible to stop it. Not ordering a toothless ban that prevented Chinese nationals from getting into the United States, but still allowed U.S. nationals to come into the United States from China, considering how widespread the virus was in China at that time. If we're going to prevent people from coming into our country that might be infected with the coronavirus, we should have prevented people from all nations, all people, from coming into the U.S. If you don't believe that Trump is a racist, then think of this. When people were showing up at the state capitol in Lansing, Michigan, with AK-47s strapped to their backs, swastikas on their signs, and calling for the head of the governor, calling for the murder of the governor, a mother and a wife, because they couldn't get a haircut or go get their nails done or go eat out at a restaurant. Trump said that they were good people and he supported their protest. But when people were protesting against racial injustice and inequality and against police brutality in the streets, peacefully, on their knees, hands up, saying, "Hands up, don't shoot," he had them forcibly removed from a church for a photo opportunity. And he sent unmarked federal agents into a city without the permission of that state governor, without the permission of the mayor of that city, to attack peaceful protesters who are protesting that Black lives should matter. When asked if he did more for black people than Lyndon B. Johnson, the president who signed into law the Civil Rights Act, his response was, "Well, look how well that turned out." As if to say, yeah, he gave black people more rights, but now we have to deal with black people feeling like they should have equal rights. Donald Trump said that the outcome of Lincoln freeing the slaves was a bad outcome. If that's your idea of not racist, then you have a pretty messed up idea of what not being racist is. As I said before with the coronavirus, the virus may have originated in China, but the minute it hit our soil, our president should have initiated a national testing strategy, initiated a contact tracing strategy, began testing people at all ports of entry into the U.S., just like South Korea did. South Korea has a national testing strategy, contact tracing, and it all starts right as people get off the plane, get off the boat, or get off the train, coming into their country. So that from the very beginning of their entrance into South Korea, they were locking down the people who had coronavirus and not allowing them into public, where they could then spread the disease. They didn't just test people who were sick or people who showed symptoms. They tested every person who came into South Korea. Right now, hospitals in the United States are only testing people who have or show symptoms. Most data shows that approximately 35% of the people who have coronavirus that we know of are asymptomatic. How can we possibly get an accurate idea of how many people are out there that might have it if we're only testing the people that show symptoms? We can't. If we had a national testing strategy, we could test everyone, regardless of whether or not they show symptoms, but we don't. And the reason that we don't is because the current administration decided that since the states that had the most cases were Democratic states, meaning they had Democrat governors, it was better politically to leave it up to the states so that when the states failed at their testing, the citizens of those states would blame the Democrat governors. There was really no other reason than politics. What have we become as a nation when our national administration puts more value on politics than actively trying to work in the best interest of public health and save lives? What have we become as a nation when the political party that believes that all life is precious believes that people should sacrifice their lives to save our economy? Is money really more valuable than human life? When it comes to mail-in voting, the president has recently said that mail-in voting is bad, but absentee voting is okay. I don't know who needs to hear this, but mail-in voting and absentee voting are the same thing. Exactly the same thing. The only difference in mail-in voting and absentee voting is the name. And like Shakespeare said, a rose by any other word would smell as sweet. Now, Trump isn't criticizing mail-in voting because he believes that it will lead to fraud. On the contrary, President Trump actively participates in mail-in voting. He trusted the post office to send us all $1,200 checks. He trusted the post office to get his ballot in securely. And let's not forget that he himself installed the current director of the U.S. Postal Service. He also ordered that new director of the U.S. Postal Service to slow down the mail 3 months before an election that would primarily take place with mail-in ballots. That's suspicious in and of itself. But the fact that he's trying to sow doubt in the mere processes of our election should worry every American, whether they're a Republican or a Democrat or any other party. We have never before this president worried about the security of our election. The only reason for Donald Trump to sow doubt in our election is because he's afraid he will lose the election. So if he loses this, it opens the door for him to say, well, there was massive fraud, and that's why I lost. I shouldn't have lost, so I should still get to be the president. Even when he won the election, he said that there was massive fraud in the election he won. So why would he not say it in an election he loses? He says the Democrats are trying to steal the election, but he himself is actually trying to steal our election, and this is based on his own words and his own actions. He is literally suing the state of Pennsylvania right now. As I speak, he is suing the state of Pennsylvania to prevent voters from being able to put their mail-in ballots in the mail-in ballot boxes. He is continuing to try to encourage voter suppression by closing down voting poll places in predominantly black areas. He's ordered interference in our postal service during an election where people will use the postal service more than usual as a safety precaution, making it so that the American people's votes will not count, making it so that your vote may not count. If you weren't worried about losing the election, why slow down the postal service? Because with mail-in voting, you have to have your votes in by a certain date. And if you do not have it in by that certain date, your vote doesn't count. That is the only reason he could possibly have to slow down the postal service. Because there is no legitimate reason to slow down the postal service. None whatsoever. The current director of the Postal Service is also a massive donor to not only the RNC, but to President Trump's own campaign. Now, if you're truly a Republican, not a Trump supporter, but a Republican, a real Republican would not stand for the atrocity of trying to steal an election, no matter who is doing it. This is no longer a matter, really, of Republican versus Democrat or any party affiliation. This is a matter of American democracy in and of itself. And regardless of whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, or if you support American democracy as a whole, if you support the Constitution of the United States, then this should piss you off. I'm not saying that Democrats have it right or that Republicans have it right, because right now our president is so concerned with keeping his job, he has forgotten to do his job. And let's face the facts. Both Democrats and Republican congressmen and women have the same problem. The vast majority of congressmen and women have been so busy trying to keep their jobs, they keep forgetting to do their jobs. So let's make this election a reckoning. Let's vote out the people who aren't willing to do their jobs, but are worried about keeping their jobs. Let's vote in people who are willing to do the job, not just try to keep the job. Let's stop voting in people who get their money from super PACs and PACs and corporate donors. Let's vote in people who are grassroots politicians, who get their money from the people and who have proved that they listen to the people. If we want to see change in America, that change starts with the voters, with the citizens. That change starts with us. If we fall together. And if we rise together. Lincoln once said, "A house divided cannot stand." And right now, America is a house divided. Divided by divisive politics orchestrated by the current administration. So let us, the American citizens, unite once and for all. We are the United States. So let's bring back some symbolism of unity and democracy to our country.